a fist hammered on a fogged-up driver's window. The man inside jerked upright, breath ragged, instinct firing the way a soldier's instinct fires even 30 years after the war. He was a 60-something man in an old olive field jacket, a wool cap pulled low, sleeping curled in the cab of a 1992 Ford F-150 in a Reno casino parking lot. Snow had powdered the windshield in the night. A casino security guard outside was tapping with the butt of a flashlight. "You can't sleep here, sir," the man nodded. He turned the key. The old V8 caught on the fourth try, the way it always did when it was cold. He pulled out of the lot at 5:30 in the morning and drove the half-mile to a 24-hour diner that didn't ask questions about the men who came in for coffee at that hour. He sat at the counter. He took off his cap. He warmed his hands around a mug. A waitress slid a folded envelope across the formica. "Eli, this came for you yesterday. Certified." "The post office boy left it because he knows you eat here." The man looked at the envelope. His name was on it in typed letters. Eli Carter, care of the Silver Sage Diner, Reno, Nevada. The return address said Pine and Halloway, attorneys at law, Carson City. He weighed it in his hand. He felt his life shifting, very slightly, in a way he had not felt in 8 years. They called him Eli Carter. Eli Carter was a homeless Gulf War veteran who had been sleeping in his truck for 2,091 nights. What did Eli Carter find on 120 acres of empty Nevada desert that made an entire mining corporation drive 11 hours to try to stop him? Stay with me on this one. 3 days earlier, the same man had walked out of a Veterans Affairs office in Reno with a thin manila folder under his arm and an answer he had already known was coming. Benefits denied again. Appeal pending. 3 to 6 months. He thanked the clerk because his mother had raised him to thank people even when they had nothing to give him. His name was Eli Carter. 58 years old. 5 feet 11. Built like a man who had once been built like a soldier and had not eaten 3 meals a day in a long while. Brown hair gone gray at the temples. Hands rough as sandpaper. A faded tattoo on his right forearm that read 1st Infantry Division, 1991. He had been homeless for 5 years and 10 months. Not on the street. He was particular about that distinction. He slept in his truck. He worked when he could find work. Day labor at the auto auction. Snow plowing in winter. Loading at the freight depot when the foreman would still take cash men. He kept his clothes clean. He kept his teeth brushed. He kept his boots oiled. He did not drink anymore. He had not had a drink in 1,112 days, and he counted them the way some men count rosary beads. Eli had a grandfather, Wallace Carter, 89 years old when he died. A miner, a prospector, a man who had spent 40 years walking the Nevada high desert with a rock hammer and a canteen and a Geiger counter he had bought used in 1962. Wallace had lived alone in a one-room cabin on 120 acres of dust and sagebrush 40 miles north of Winnemucca, in a place the maps called Coyote Flats. Wallace had been Eli's only living family for 30 years. He had served in Korea in 51 and 52. He had been buried 6 months ago in a veteran's plot, and Eli had not known until a state trooper ran his plate at a rest stop, and the system spat back a notice about a probate matter. That was what had brought Eli to the law office of Pine and Halloway, by way of the certified envelope at the diner. The lawyer was an old man named Russell Pine. 70-something. White hair. A face like a worn leather glove. He had handled Wallace Carter's affairs for 40 years, paid in silver dollars and assayed or samples, because Wallace had not believed in checks. Pine called Eli into his office at 9 o'clock the morning, after the envelope had reached the diner. Pine said, Mr. Carter, I want you to know I tried to find you. Your grandfather wanted you found. The state took a while. Eli said, I move around. Pine said, I know you do. I drove a man up to a shelter in Sparks 3 years ago looking for you. You'd left 2 months before. Pine opened a folder. He slid a single sheet of paper across to Eli. He said, your grandfather left you the cabin. 1 acre with the structure. The remaining 119 acres around it. All of it. Subsurface rights included by separate filing. The deed is clean. No mortgage. No liens. The county taxes are paid through next year. Your grandfather paid them in advance. Eli read it twice. He said, he left me 120 acres. Pine said, he left you 120 acres and a cabin and a sealed envelope that he asked me to give to you when you were standing inside that cabin and not 1 minute before. He was specific. If the boy reads this anywhere else, he will not understand it. Pine slid a second envelope across the desk. Sealed. Wax over the flap, stamped with a small flat-pressed image of a rock hammer. Eli took it. He said, what's it worth? Pine said, the county has it assessed at $18,000 for the land and $12,000 for the structure. The structure is, condemned but standing. So low. Call it $30,000 on paper. The road is dirt for the last 17 miles. There is no power. There is no well. There is no commercial value. Eli said, anything else? Pine paused. There has been an offer. From a mining company. Tessera Lithium Holdings, out of Las Vegas. They have offered $80,000 cash for the entire parcel. The offer was made to your grandfather 6 times over the last 4 years. He refused every time. The most recent offer was made to me, on behalf of the estate 3 weeks ago. They are aware that the heir is a veteran of difficult means. They have asked me to convey the offer with what they called a strong recommendation that you accept. Eli folded the sealed letter and put it inside his jacket. He said, I'll see the place first. Pine smiled. The smile of a man who had been holding a secret for 40 years and was finally about to put it down. He said, Mr. Carter, your grandfather paid me on retainer a sum of $3,040. Less my fees, it comes to $2,800. There is a check on my desk. Cash it. Get your truck looked at. Buy a kerosene heater and a winter coat that isn't 30 years old. The desert in May still freezes at night. I do not want you to die before you read that letter. Eli took the check. The most money he had held in his hand at one time in 11 years. He thanked Russell Pine. He walked out. In the lobby, a man was sitting in a chair. Suit. Late 40s. Watch with a leather band. Hair combed too carefully. When Eli came out, he stood up. The man said, Mr. Carter, my name is Brett Holloway. No relation to the law firm. I represent Tessera Lithium Holdings. I'd like to talk to you for 10 minutes about an opportunity. Eli said, I'm going to see the place first. Holloway smiled the way men in suits smile at men in field jackets. Mr. Carter, I understand you've been having a hard run. $80,000 in your account this week. You could be in a house by Friday. Eli said, I'll see the place first. Holloway said, there is nothing out there to see. We are doing you a courtesy. We are paying significantly above appraised value. Eli said, then you can wait 3 days. Holloway's mouth opened. It shut. He pushed a business card into Eli's hand. Call me when you change your mind. The offer drops to $65,000 if you make us drive out there. Eli put the card in his pocket. He walked out. He cashed the check. He bought a new battery and a serpentine belt, a kerosene heater, a sleeping bag rated to 0, a case of water and a flat of canned beans, coffee, bread, bacon, and a small bottle of whiskey, because old habits do not always die, but sometimes they sit on a shelf and watch you. He did not open it. He put it under the passenger seat where he would not see it. He drove out of Reno at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I-80 east through the desert. The sun set behind him. Past Lovelock. Past Winnemucca. At the third exit past Winnemucca, he turned north on a state road and then onto a county road and then onto a dirt road that the map called Coyote Flats Lane. 17 miles of it. Twice he had to engage four-wheel drive on hubs that had not been engaged in a year. Twice he had to roll a rock the size of a watermelon out of his ruts. It was just past midnight when his headlights swept across the cabin. The cabin was one room, 12 by 16 feet. Tar paper siding peeling off in long strips. A stovepipe that leaned against the ridge cap like it had given up trying to stand. A door on one hinge. One window glassless, boarded with warped plywood. A porch the size of a postage stamp, one of its 3 planks missing. Behind it, a sagging outhouse. In front, the desert opened in every direction under a hard white moon. No power line. No fence. No other building visible. The nearest neighbor was 9 miles down the road, and the nearest neighbor was a Bureau of Land Management cattle guard. Eli sat in the truck. He looked at the cabin. Something moved in his chest that had not moved in a long time. Not joy. Something quieter. He thought of Wallace walking back to this cabin at the end of every day for 50 years, hanging his rock hammer on a peg, putting a kettle on the stove. Wallace had been alone, the way Eli was alone. Wallace had built this with his hands. Eli got out. He pushed the crooked door. It scraped open on dirt, grit, and rust. Inside, the air was thick with sage dust and the particular dry cool of a stone-floored desert room. A potbelly wood stove squatted in the middle. A cot frame against one wall, the canvas long rotted. A small table. 2 chairs. A shelf with a coffee tin and a mason jar of something brown. A kerosene lantern on the table, dry, but with a wick that looked like it might still burn. A worn Bible on the shelf. And on the table, dead center, the way a man sets something down on the last day he means to come home, was a small leather notebook. Closed. A pencil stub on top of it. Eli sat down at the table. He lit the lantern. He opened the sealed envelope. The handwriting was Wallace Carter's. Eli had not seen it since he was 22, but he knew it the way a man knows a song he has not heard in 40 years. Grandson, if you are reading this, you are sitting at my table inside the cabin, and I am dead. Good. I have been ready a long time. The lawyer in Reno will have told you the place is worth nothing. He will have told you a company has offered $80,000. He believes he is telling you the truth because he is not a geologist. Open my journals on the shelf. The blue notebooks. There are 7. Read them in order. The first 6 are about cattle and weather and a coyote I trapped in 1974. The 7th one is what you need. Start on page 40. Read to the end. Do not show the 7th journal to anyone, not the lawyer, not the man in the suit, not anyone, until you have walked into the office of an attorney whose name and address I have written on the slip folded inside this envelope. That attorney is a veteran. He will know what to do because I have already told him. You have everything you need now, Eli. You always did. I am sorry I did not come find you when you came home from the desert and went under. I should have. I love you, son. Granddad. Folded behind the letter was a name. Daniel Morales, attorney at law, mineral rights and veteran trusts, Plum Lane, Reno. Eli took down the seventh notebook. He turned to page 40. He read the whole seventh notebook. He read it twice. Then he sat in the cold cabin for 45 minutes without moving. Beginning in 1978, Wallace Carter had walked every square foot of the 120 acres with a portable conductivity meter. He had been hunting placer silver. He had not found placer silver. What he had found, almost by accident, in the saline mud at the bottom of an ancient dry lake basin on the southern edge of the parcel, was a brine. He had collected samples in canning jars. He had driven the jars 200 miles to a friend at the University of Nevada, Reno, who owed him a favor from Korea. The friend, a chemist, had run the samples. The samples had come back in 1979 with concentrations of dissolved lithium chloride in the range of 900 parts per million. In 1979, that had meant almost nothing. Lithium was used for psychiatric medication and ceramics. The price was low. There was no profit in digging it up out of a dry lake bed in northern Nevada. Wallace had written on page 44, "The price won't be low forever. They'll find a use. Something will come. I'll keep walking the line." He had kept walking the line for 40 more years. He had refined his maps. He had marked his sample points. He had filed and refiled a mineral claim on the entire parcel every 5 years, on the dot, paying the fees in money orders so that no clerk would lose them. The seventh notebook contained the original survey notes, the assay certificate from the university chemist, the receipts for every claim refiling, and a series of newspaper clippings, the last one from January, about Tessera Lithium Holdings receiving a state permit to drill an exploratory well on land adjacent to Wallace Carter's parcel. Eli closed the notebook. He understood why Brett Holloway had offered $80,000. He understood why his grandfather had refused 6 times. He understood why his grandfather had paid the taxes a year in advance. Wallace had not left him a worthless cabin. Wallace had left him a lithium brine deposit that the world had finally decided was worth something. Electric cars, battery banks, phones, laptops. Every flashing light on every dashboard in every parking lot in America was running, in part, on the white salt that bubbled up out of dry lake beds like the one on the southern edge of Coyote Flats. Eli walked outside. The desert was very cold. The moon had set. The stars were the kind of stars you only see in places where there are no people. He looked south, toward the basin he could not see in the dark but that he now knew was there. He raised a hand toward it. He said quiet, "Hello, Granddad." He slept in the cabin that night, sleeping bag on the dirt floor next to the cold stove. He lay on his back and listened to the wind, moving across 120 acres of land that was his. He drove back into Reno the next morning. He drove straight to the address on the slip of paper. An office on Plum Lane. 2nd floor. A frosted glass door. Morales and Trent and Lee. Daniel Morales, the door said, veterans and mineral rights. The woman at the front desk looked up. Reading glasses on a chain. A coffee mug that said Semper Fi. She looked at Eli for 1/2 second and said, without asking, "You served?" Eli said, "First Infantry." 91. She nodded. "Mr. Morales is with a client. Sit down. Coffee." 40 minutes later, a tall man in his 60s came out of the inner office, walking a younger woman in a wheelchair to the door, shaking her hand and saying things to her like, "Brother, and we will fight this, and you have my word." Then he turned to Eli. His handshake was a hand bones of a working man handshake. He said, "Eli Carter, I know who you are. I have been waiting for you for 2 months. Come in. Inside, Daniel Morales said, Your grandfather called me 4 years ago. He came to my office in person from Coyote Flats. He hired me on a sealed retainer. He told me you would walk through my door someday. He told me what was in the 7th journal. He told me he had refused to sell to Tessera 6 times because Tessera was lowballing. He told me he wanted his grandson to be the one to deal with them. He told me you were a soldier. He told me you were in trouble. He told me when you came, I was to handle the matter as if you were my own brother. Which with respect you are. Eli said, What's the matter worth? Morales pulled a thick folder out of his desk. He said, Tessera offered your grandfather $80,000 because they believed the deposit was a localized pocket. Their belief was that they could acquire your parcel cheaply, extract the easy lithium, and walk away inside 8 years. Morales said, Your grandfather, on his own time and his own dollar, drilled 4 cased monitoring wells over 40 years. He logged them every 6 months. The data shows the brine deposit does not stop at the southern third of the parcel. It underlies all 120 acres of Coyote Flats, plus several thousand additional acres of adjacent Bureau of Land Management land that your grandfather secured a federal exploration lease on in 1986. That lease is still active. It is in your name now. Eli said, All right. Morales said, Sir, I had an independent assessor review your grandfather's data. The assay confirms his numbers within 3%. The conservative valuation of the deposit at current lithium carbonate spot pricing, factoring in extraction cost, royalty structure, and federal lease overlay, is $265 million. Eli sat very still. He said, $265 million. Morales said, That is the conservative number. The aggressive number is closer to 400. I prefer the conservative number because I do not like to make a veteran any promise that prices will not break. Eli looked at his hands on the arms of the chair. The same hands that had held a rifle in a desert 35 years ago. The same hands that had held a steering wheel sleeping in a casino parking lot 2 nights ago. The same hands that had cashed a $2,800 check yesterday and had felt rich. Eli said, I have to tell you something. Morales said, Go on. Eli said, I have been homeless for almost 6 years. I have been sober for 1,112 days. Before I was sober, I was not a good man. I am still not sure how good a man I am. If a thing like this lands on a man like me, I do not trust myself to spend it. Do you understand? Morales said, I understand. I lost 2 of my men to a bottle in 2004. I have built every trust I have ever drafted around the idea that veterans who come back into money come back into trouble. I have a draft on my desk for you that your grandfather wrote out in longhand sitting in that chair you are sitting in. He drafted the bones of it himself. He had 2 engineers and a tax attorney finish it. The trust is conservative. It is restricted. It is for you, and it is also bigger than you. Eli said, Tell me about it. Morales said, The trust receives the royalties. You receive a fixed monthly draw, set conservatively. Enough to live well, but not enough to ruin yourself. The remainder funds 3 things. First, a restoration of the cabin and the land to your specification. Your home for as long as you live. Second, a Veterans Rehabilitation and Addiction Recovery Foundation, named for your grandfather. The foundation would build and operate a small residential recovery facility in northern Nevada for veterans with substance use disorders and homelessness. We have estimates. We have land already optioned. We have a board. 3 of the board seats are yours. The first seat your grandfather already filled. He named you as chair. Third, an emergency veterans fund, administered at cost, to provide immediate housing, vehicle repair, and medical bridge funding for homeless and at-risk veterans who, like you, are walking around with a winter coat that is older than my daughter. Quick disbursements. Cash on hand for a man who needs a tire by Friday. Eli sat with that. He said that was Granddad. Morales said that was your grandfather. He wrote it in pencil in this chair 4 years ago. He told me, my grandson is one of the men this fund is for. If he can stand up after this, he will know better than anyone what other men like him need. Now if you are still with me on this one, I am going to ask you to do one thing. Tap that subscribe button right now. The next part is the part where the man in the suit comes back with 2 more men in suits, and the homeless veteran sits across a conference table from a billion-dollar mining company. You are going to want to be here for that. Eli said, what do we do about Tessera? Morales said, Tessera is going to drive into Reno tomorrow. Brett Holloway already called my office yesterday. He has been calling everyone in Carson City and Reno who handled your grandfather's affairs. He knows you are here. He will be in this office tomorrow at 10 with 2 of his partners and a vice president from corporate. He has asked for a meeting to, quote, finalize the parcel acquisition. He believes he is meeting a homeless man with no lawyer and a quick offer. Eli said, what does he get? Morales said, he gets a meeting. He gets to sit across from us. We sit on our side of the table with our papers and our data and our federal lease and our 40 years of monitoring well logs. We sit with the 7th Journal of Wallace Carter. Eli said, and then what? Morales said, and then either Tessera makes a real offer or Tessera walks. If they walk, 3 other companies are already on a short list. We do not need Tessera. Tessera needs us. Eli slept that night in a hotel that Morales paid for, against the trust that did not yet legally exist. He took a shower that lasted 30 minutes. He sat on the edge of the bed in a white towel. He had not slept in a real bed in 14 months. At 10 the next morning, Brett Holloway walked into Morales's conference room with a vice president named Carl Schroeder and a junior associate named Patel, and a polished briefcase the color of dark honey. Holloway saw Eli sitting at the table. Holloway smiled. Mr. Carter, good to see you again. Eli did not stand up. He nodded. Morales sat to Eli's right. To Eli's left sat a woman named Janet Whitehorse. She was a hydrogeologist from the University of Nevada, Reno. She had been Wallace Carter's chemist's daughter. She had read the 7th Journal the previous afternoon. Holloway started his pitch. He talked about Tessera's track record. He talked about generous offer. He used the word leverage. He used the word reasonable. He said, Mr. Carter, we are prepared to come up to $120,000. A 50% increase, in recognition of the inconvenience to you of attending this meeting. Morales said, Mr. Holloway, may I share some documents? Morales slid a packet across the table. The monitoring well logs. The independent assay. The federal lease on the adjacent BLM acreage. Janet Whitehorse's hydrogeology summary. On top, in Morales's handwriting in heavy black ink, a single sheet that said simply counter offer. Carl Schroeder read the packet slowly. He set his coffee down. He turned the 2nd page. He turned the 3rd page. He looked at Patel. Patel was already pale. Schroeder said, Mr. Morales, where did you obtain these monitoring well logs? Morales said, from the holder of the parcel. Wallace Carter drilled the wells in 1978, 83, 91, and 2007. They are cased and logged. They are legal. They are 46 years of continuous data. Schroeder said, and the federal lease overlay. Morales said, active. renewed last March. In Mr. Carter's name as of the probate ruling 6 weeks ago. Schroeder leaned back. He looked at Brett Holloway for several seconds without speaking. Holloway began to sweat in a way that men in expensive suits are not supposed to sweat. Schroeder said, "Brett, I want a word." The three men from Tessera left the conference room. They were gone for 11 minutes. Eli sat in his chair. He did not drink the coffee in front of him. He did not move. Janet Whitehorse passed him a small piece of paper under the table. It said, "You are doing fine." He nodded once. They came back. Schroeder said, "Mr. Carter, Mr. Morales, Tessera withdraws its previous offer. We would like to propose a partnership." Morales said, "We are listening." Schroeder said, "Tessera develops the deposit under a joint operating agreement. Tessera carries all capital expense. We pay Mr. Carter a base royalty of 18% on all lithium carbonate equivalent products sold. We also pay an annual signing payment of $2 million, beginning at signing, for 10 years, against future royalties. We also fund, separately, a community benefits payment of $1 million per year for the life of the operation." Morales did not blink. 22% royalty. 3 million annual signing for 10 years. 2 million annual community benefits, with audit rights, paid directly to the trust we designate. And Mr. Carter retains the right to walk every survey crew and every drilling crew off the parcel for any safety or environmental violation, with no liability. Mr. Carter lives in the cabin. Nobody crosses the cabin's quarter-acre footprint. Ever? Schroeder said, 20%. 2.5 million signing. 1.5 million community. We agree to the cabin footprint. Morales looked at Eli. Eli nodded. Morales said, "Done. Papers in your hand by Friday." It was done in 11 minutes. Brett Holloway did not say anything for the rest of the meeting. He shook Eli's hand at the door. His hand was damp. He looked at Eli the way men in suits look at men they have been wrong about, which is the worst look in the world to be on the receiving end of, even when you are the one who has one. Eli looked back at him without any feeling in it at all. When the door closed, Morales sat back and laughed once. He said, "Welcome to the rest of your life, brother." Eli said, "How long until the trust is funded?" Morales said, "Signing payment lands in escrow Friday. The trust draws Monday. You will be a man with $2.5 million in a structured trust on Monday morning." Eli said, "When do I see my cabin?" Morales said, "Drive up tonight if you want. I would suggest one stop on the way. There is a veteran shelter in Sparks. Brother named Hector runs it. Hector and I serve together. He has 6 men sleeping there tonight who are 6 months behind where you were yesterday. The firm can advance a check today for housing, vehicle work, and food assistance for those 6 men. $20,000. You sign the check. Hector hands the money out tomorrow morning. Would you do that?" Eli said, "I would do that." He did that. He stopped at Hector's shelter on his way out of town. He gave Hector $20,000 and a list, written in Eli's own hand on yellow legal pad, of the kind of things he had needed himself, year by year. A new battery for a tired truck. A motel room for 3 days while a man got his bearings. A pair of insulated boots in November. Hector took the list. Hector said, "Soldier." "God bless you." Eli said, "Soldier, God bless you back." Then he drove north. He drove the 17 miles of dirt road to Coyote Flats. He sat in the truck for a long time. Then he got out. He walked up onto the broken porch. He stood there and he looked at the desert. The man who had been handed nothing was home. 6 months later, the cabin was no longer a cabin. It was still a cabin. Eli had not turned it into a mansion. He had pulled off the rotten tar paper and put up cedar siding. He had put a new tin roof on. He had put glass in the window. He had replaced the porch planks and added a second porch off the back, looking south toward the basin. He had drilled a proper well and put up a windmill and run a solar array on a pole. The outhouse was gone, replaced with a small bathhouse of the same cedar. The cabin sat on the parcel looking exactly like a cabin that had been built by a careful man and finally repaired by a careful grandson. Wallace Carter's 7 blue journals sat on a new shelf made of pine that Eli had milled himself from a tree he had cut on his own land. The 7th journal sat on top of the Bible. The pencil stub sat on top of the 7th journal. Some things do not need to be put away. A new chair sat on the porch. A wooden chair Eli had built himself, with a back that did not snap. He sat in it every evening with a tin cup of coffee, watching the desert change colors as the sun went down. The lithium operation was being run by Tessera under terms that did not let them forget they were guests on Eli Carter's parcel. The wellfield was on the southern third of the property, 2 miles from the cabin, behind a low ridge that hid every visible piece of equipment from Eli's porch. The trust was paying out exactly the way Daniel Morales had drafted it. The trust did several things. It paid Eli a fixed monthly draw of $11,000, indexed to inflation. Enough to live well in northern Nevada and to travel when he wanted, and not enough to ruin a man who had spent 6 years sleeping in a truck. He gave half of every check to the foundation by automatic transfer. He kept the other half. He needed almost nothing. It funded the Wallace Carter Veterans Recovery Center on a 40-acre parcel outside Winnemucca. The center opened on the first anniversary of Eli's signing. 18 residential beds, 3 counselors, 2 veterans peer support specialists, a small medical clinic, a workshop where men learn to weld, to wire, to lay tile, to keep their hands busy in the months they were learning to keep their heads quiet. Hector from Sparks had moved up to run the place. He had taken a 50% pay cut from the shelter job to do it, and he had told Eli, "This is the first job I have had in 20 years that lets me sleep." It funded the Emergency Veterans Fund. Quick cash for veterans in trouble in northern Nevada. By the end of the first year, the fund had helped almost 1,400 men and women. A new transmission for a single mother in Carson City who was driving home health aid rounds. A motel room for 60 days for a Vietnam-era veteran whose wife had died. A pair of new tires for a kid 2 years out of Afghanistan who could not get to his welding job. 3 months of rent for a Marine just leaving a sober house in Reno. Eli reviewed every disbursement over $5,000 personally on a clipboard in his cabin with a fresh cup of coffee. He never said no to a man who needed a tire. It paid the surface owners of Tessera's adjacent parcels their share of community benefit payments, the way the contract required. Some of them were ranchers. Some were Paiute and Shoshone families, with land allotments that had been in their families for generations. Eli had asked Morales to make sure those families were on the distribution list. They had been on the list since the second quarter. It paid the property tax on 120 acres of Coyote Flats 2 years in advance, the way Wallace Carter had paid it. Some habits a man inherits. The rest of the money sat in the trust. It would sit there for a long time. Eli did not need it. He needed almost nothing. A good rifle for hunting in the fall. Coffee. A satellite phone so he could call Daniel Morales once a week and Hector twice a week. A truck that ran. A horse that he had bought in the spring and named Wallace. Books in winter. He did not want a bigger house. He did not want a bigger life. He had what he wanted. He had the parcel. One afternoon in late October, a small four-door car came up the dirt road. A woman got out. Late 50s. Reading glasses. The Semper Fi mug from Daniel Morales's reception desk had said something about a daughter. This was that daughter. She was the woman from Morales's office, whose name Eli had finally learned was Maria. She had driven the 17 miles of dirt road alone because Daniel was in court that day, and somebody needed to bring Eli the latest reports from Hector, and a card from a Korean War veteran in Elko who had wanted to write the man who had paid his oxygen bill in September. Maria stood at the porch. She held up a folder. She said, "Mr. Carter, I have come a long way." Eli said, "There's a chair on the porch." "Sit down." She sat. He poured her a cup of coffee. They drank it in silence for a while. She said, "Why this place? Why this little shack?" He told her. He told her about his grandfather Wallace, about how Wallace had walked the parcel with a portable conductivity meter for 40 years, hunting placer silver and finding something else, about how Wallace had filed a federal exploration lease on the adjacent BLM ground in 1986 because he knew it would matter someday, about how Wallace had paid the taxes a year in advance because he knew his grandson was somewhere out in the world drinking and forgetting how to be a man, about how Wallace had walked into Daniel Morales's office 4 years ago and had said, "My grandson is one of the men this fund is for. Please be ready when he comes." About how the parcel had looked like nothing. About how that had been its protection. About how no mining company in 1979 had wanted 120 acres of dry lake bed in Coyote Flats. About how no mining company in 1999 had wanted it either. About how the world had finally turned, the way Wallace had said it would, and the white salt in the basin had become worth digging up. About how Wallace had been right for 47 years, while the world caught up to him. About how Wallace had left him the door because Wallace had known he was the only one who would open it. Maria nodded. Her eyes were wet. She drank her coffee. She said, "I should have come up to see you sooner." Eli said, "You are up here now." The sun went down behind the western ridge. Eli raised his tin cup toward the place where his grandfather was buried in the Veterans Cemetery in Winnemucca, 40 miles away. He said quiet, "You did good, old man. You did good." The desert was quiet. The man who had been handed nothing sat on his porch, in his handmade chair, and watched the first stars come out over 120 acres of land that was his. He had everything he wanted. He always had.